Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 243 of Retropower and Den, and we're going to start with E-Type that is hovering above me. There are two lines of attack on this one. One is the exhaust. However, Scott has, stepping back from my however, Scott, who you will remember from not that long ago on our videos, who left, it was about 2 years ago I believe, he left us for the brighter lights of Aston Martin. But he's back, which is very, very welcome. He's most welcome back, and we've been looking forward to him coming back. Unfortunately, and he's very embarrassed about this and has apologised profusely, he's not very well. He's actually got a stomach bug. So what he's been working on is partially what I'm working on, but mainly it's supposed to be exhaust system, because that's what he's going to be doing a lot of, is our TIG welding work. Unfortunately, as I say, he's not here, so I can't really show you very much of the exhaust work. However, there was a hold-up on getting into the exhaust work, which I will elaborate on, related to the oiling system on the V12 engine in this E-Type. Now, we're using a later V12 from an X300 Saloon, the 6-litre engine. For a variety of reasons, it kind of makes a better base engine. I'm sure plenty of Jaguar people will correct me on all sorts of things here, but basically that engine from the factory came with conventional crankshaft seals, a conventional rear crankshaft seal, which is a major step forward. It's not a 2-minute undertaking to convert the earlier type V12 to a conventional rear seal, a modern type rear seal. These engines had that as standard, so that's a significant leg up. They also had various other things, namely a crankshaft trigger. They had camshaft sensors installed into the cam covers. There's a whole lot of little reasons why actually using the 6-litre engine made more sense than starting with a 5.3. They all add up. Each one individually wouldn't take much solving, but by the time you've solved all of those problems, you might as well pay not an awful lot of money and start with a 6-litre X300 engine, which has all the right bits to start with. However, it has one wrong bit to start with. Now, we thought we could work around it, but we can't, which is the oil filter takeoff housing, which is up here at the back of the engine. On Jaguar V12, for those who don't know, the oil takeoff housing, either on the back of the block or on the front in the case of an E-Type, houses the oil pressure relief valve. It isn't integral within the oil pump, it's separate. And so you kind of need that housing, otherwise you don't have any oil pressure control, so it's pretty important. And then on the X300 engine, it also houses the oil filter about there, and it also has two big takeoffs which feed the oil cooler. I'll elaborate slightly now. On the X300 engine, the oil cooler takeoffs are fed in the main engine flow path, so the oil that is actually being fed into the engine goes through the cooler. Why I'm mentioning that will become clear in a minute. However, the issue we've got is that we bought an off-the-shelf a pair of exhaust manifolds for this from Classic Fabs, and they are very, very, very nicely made. They're very expensive, but as usual with these things, you get what you pay for, and they're beautifully made. Often we would go to make our own exhaust manifolds. We knew this would be pretty fiddly, so we decided to buy off-the-shelf ones. However, they are designed for a conventional E-Type V12 installation, not the 6-litre type, so they give us a problem with the oil housing. And having thought all the issues through and gone backwards and forwards a little bit, we decided that it would be better to basically change the oiling system, apart from the oil pump, i.e. the sump, the takeoff plate, the pressure relief, etc., to the E-Type setup. On the E-Type, there's a large filter housing runs across here, big oval element type filter housing. Now, conversions are available off the shelf to convert that to a screw type oil filter. However, all of that is a moot point, because we have re-engineered the front of the engine to mount various ancillaries that the car either didn't have, or actually in this case it did have, because it was an American market car. However, they were appallingly badly mounted. This car originally had the alternator basically hanging on a fishing line, reversed on the front of the engine. It was an appallingly flimsy setup, really not very nice from the factory. That not very Jaguar engineering really, but I think it was just blimey, let's just fit it somewhere, we've got to get all this stuff in. So we've re-engineered all that, and we've got the alternator on a much nicer mount, we've got an air conditioning compressor on a much nicer mount, we've got it all on poly V belts with automatic tensioning. It's a much nicer setup. We've revised the water elbow, we've done various revisions. However, all of these revisions were done assuming we're going to use the rear oil takeoff. We can't, and if we try and use the E-type setup on the front, that feeds the oil into the front timing cover on the engine, which then feeds the main oil gallery. We can't do that because it will clash with the air conditioning compressor drive. So we did a bit of lateral thinking, and I came up with a plan to basically modify the E-type oil filter housing, which we have done. Basically bandsawed it off, got it set up in the mill, machined it off, done various bits of machining on it, cleaned it all up, blah, blah, blah. That is now fitted to where it would normally be fitted to on the E-type sump, but gives me an AN12 oil takeoff, so that the oil pump output, the regulated oil pump output, now comes out of that fitting there. I can then pipe that to a remote filter, which can go in here, in the front here, and then I can pipe from the remote filter to a threaded fitting, which will go through the middle of the air conditioning compressor belt drive, right through the middle of that belt path, clearing the belt, and feed the oil into the main oil gallery in the engine. We needed to remote the oil filter anyway, so this is actually quite an elegant solution. And what we're going to do, we were going to use a water to oil cooling setup anyway. We're actually going to use a laminova type cooler. However, we've now stepped back a little bit and thought, well, the E-type original oil cooler is actually pretty functional. There's not an awful lot wrong with them. The car isn't a competition car, it's not going racing. It actually probably makes quite a lot of sense to just use the E-type oil cooler. So we're obviously going to strip that down, check it all, make sure everything's good with that, but I think it is. And at that point we will revise our water plumbing very slightly, but nothing too drastic there, and run the main radiator flow through this oil cooler, which is kind of all built into the sump arrangement on the E-type. It's actually very neat, but we'll use this takeoff housing to feed that. That solves a myriad of problems, and after all of that enables Scott to get on with the exhaust system once he's finished being rather busy on the toilet. So that's about it in terms of mine and Scott's work on the E-type. Moving on to other stuff on the E-type, you'll hear a bit more from George about what's been going on up top with the very final bits of design in terms of his reservoir pedal box setup that he's been working on. So I'll let George talk about that. Moving on from that, we're going to go on to the Saab. Now, I promised a little chat with Bobby, but I wasn't here last week. I was moving house. That went well. I now am moved into my house, and now I'm just compiling the ever-increasing job list of things to do on the house, but we're very pleased to move in. We've got a lovely garden now, we've got a nice workshop, and I'm going to be doing lots and lots and lots of work and DIY and all sorts of things at home as well in my evenings, of my no hours evenings. But moving on to this, I promised Bobby last week. You didn't get Bobby last week because I wasn't here. However, this week Bobby is going to talk through the work he has done on the wiper mechanism on this, because it's quite involved, and he's going to explain it better than I can. It's quite complicated. He's done a beautiful job of it, as always. So over to Bobby. He's going to talk you through that.
Hello everyone. Welcome back from me. It's been a while since I've been on the camera, so I'm back now. I finished last week, and this week I finished all the wiper motor mechanism linkages. So as for from the previous video, we went for a hybrid between the original Saab linkage and the Audi wiper motor. So I've completed that, and I've created a mounting, again using part of the original motor mounting, how it was on the Audi. I managed to salvage the original bushes, which are 3 of them, and they pretty much stop any vibration, any noises coming from the motor through the bulkhead and just in the cabin. So I managed to reuse them as well, which is good, because it will be more refined experience, I would guess, end of the day when the car is finished. Yeah, so I've been doing that, and I cut all the temporary bracing here on the skin aperture, because my bracketry currently is attaching the wiper blade, the wiper blade linkages through the bulkhead and the scuttle panel. So the scuttle panel currently is bolted with that bracket over there to the bulkhead. This keeps everything aligned and steady now. So that'll give me a chance to start working on filling up the bit between on the interior side between the scuttle and the bulkhead. But now the tricky bit is the corners here. So I try to make it look as if it is original as well. The inside is a bit more complicated as the outside as well. So and it's actually I ended up having two skins, one skin on the outside, finish off the outside as you would look, and then on the inside I've got again a different bit. So it's kind of it's a very weird point because you've got 5 angles and you want to join all of them and make a sense of them as well. Plus here on the inside we've got the brackets, these brackets which hold the crossbar under the dash, so you have to clear them as well. That's the challenge I am facing right now. Yeah, that's pretty much it for now, I guess. I mean, a small bit for the bracketry there, so I for the wiper mechanism. So I use 2 brackets because if it's one full bracket, we can thread the whole assembly under the scuttle panel. Choosing fixings, I'm always trying to use same lengths and same diameters when you have a component bolted together to a bracket or whatever, because later it's going to be easier when you assemble it, when you service it. Because if you have, say, we got currently 3 bolts on the top and we got inside hidden another 4 bolts, so 7 bolts, and if I have 3 short and 4 long bolts or different sizes, once someone take apart the assembly for whatever reason, servicing or anything, when they went to put it back on, they could very easily mix match them, and if you have a longer bolt somewhere sticking in the mechanism, it could bind into it. Yeah, so that's just a short off track about this. But yeah, apart from that, we're golden and we're cracking on.
So thank you very much, Bobby. And moving on from that, we're going to go and have a look at the E9 because Stu is forging ahead with getting this in. There's been various other bits and bobs as well, but the main drive of this week's activity on the E9 is getting a S54 engine fitted into an E9 engine bay on an E30 crossmember using a Z3 steering rack and E30 M3 suspension arms and a whole pile of BMW parts. They're all coming together actually very nicely. Things are really coming together very well. As you can see, there's a socking great hole being cut in the middle of the E9. Conveniently, there was quite a lot of rust in that junction between the scuttle vent panel area and the bulkhead, so it's very convenient that bit needed cutting out because it needed repairing anyway, so that's very handy. Stu's got this engine now carefully sat on a lot of bits of wood in exactly the right position. We're talking millimetres to and fro in all directions really, but that's now sat in exactly the right position. We're using, obviously the engine is E46 M3 as you've seen, and the mountings we're going to use for it are E46 M3 mounts. We've had a little look this morning and we can actually get those to sit really quite nicely on the E30 crossmember. A little bit of modification. We're going to do some reinforcement as well because the mounts on the E30 crossmember are a bit flimsy, even with a 4-cylinder engine, let alone with a 6 like this. So we're going to do a bit of reinforcement down there. But basically, the E30 crossmember will accept the engine mountings in a position that's very, very close to the original E30 engine mounting. So we're really quite pleased with that. That's all looking very good. So Stu's now going to be cracking on with the various other bits of metalwork involved in mounting this engine. So I think I believe the next stage is going to be to make the arms from the engine block out to those mounts. The aluminium mounts, you can see one sat on top of that, or 2 sat on top of that box of parts down there. Because Stu's stripped all of this engine down to get all the extraneous parts out of the way. Once we knew they all physically fitted, he had all of those on when he put the engine in, but now they're kind of in the way. So he's taken all of those bits off so he can actually get his arms into work. Everything's oily. We probably ought to have steam cleaned it first, but hey ho. So yeah, the next phase is basically making replacements for those cast aluminium mounting arms in steel, and there is a prop right here. That would be the near side mounting bracket, which Stu has done in the first iteration of CAD, and then my laptop's over there where we will turn this CAD into computery CAD, and from there we will CNC cut on the plasma cutter this piece in some suitable steel plate and fold it, and then we'll fabricate the gussets down the side of it, and that will be the near side engine mounting, and then a similar mounting with a slightly longer plate this side because the plate on the block's a little bit longer, and a similar arm this side, and that will give us the two mounting arms to the original type E46 mounting bushes on the E30 cross member, and that will be the mounting done. Then we've got to concoct a combination of new floor and transmission tunnel plus the transmission mounts, but that all looks very doable as well, nothing too untoward there. Looks like there's lots of room for the exhaust. We're really pretty pleased with how it's all lining up. The major trauma area really is the bulkhead, as you can see, and the difficulties there are three really. Steering column, which looks pretty eminently doable. Pedal box, which none of the E9 bits are going to be any use at all. So we're going to reinvent that lot completely. And the air intake for the HVAC system, which needs to come from this area because it's fed from the bonnet vents. So obviously this area needs to be sealed from the rest of the engine bay, so we don't get any engine odours brought in by the HVAC system, but can still be fed by the bonnet vents. So to that end, Stu's going to fabricate a recessed bulkhead, but then this section here, which is like the ceiling setup that used to go all the way across, this will be completed and brought back over the engine with a bolt-in section. For those who've worked on something like, I mean, a lot of modern BMWs do this, but in my head, my L322 Range Rover has a similar setup. There's basically a centre section here that unbolts, that seals the air intakes away from the engine bay, but it still enables access to the back of the engine. So to get at the rear plug, it'll be a case of removing that centre section of the scuttle panel, but that will then enable us to draw the intake air. We're going to blank all this area off because I think we're going to be drawing the intake air in from the other side, but still it'll be drawn from this plenum area here. So that is where we're at in terms of the engine being in. I think we've mentioned all the replacement panels last week, and Stu's been finalising the cross-member mountings as well earlier this week, which he's got all tacked up solidly now, and they're looking really, really good. So yeah, great progress coming together. Engine's going to be mounted imminently. And it looks like we might even be able to use the mechanical fan, and it looks like we may even be able to use the original type, obviously new, but the original type cooler pack from the E46 M3 as well, which would be really quite nice if we could. It just makes certainties in terms of cooling capacity, because most production cars are way overcated for in terms of cooling because they're designed to go on heat cycles with a load dyno on the back and everything else as manufacturers put them through that. This car's never going to be doing any towing, it's not going to be doing those sort of conditions, so we know that'll be absolutely fine. Moving on from that, we will briefly swing past this little table here because Matt is busy here. He's scuttled out of the way at the minute because I was going to try and record this over lunch, and I had a bit of a forklift crisis. I was on the brink of doing a Basil faulty with a tree to beat the forklift, but it's started working again, so I could bring it back from where I'd got it stranded down the bottom of the yard. And I've come back, and Matt's actually been cracking on really well with these. We had forgotten that we needed to cap off the ends of all these brass trims for the Churchill Jaguar, and these are about to go for polishing and copper plating. And so Matt's just getting on with brazing up the ends of all these trims so that we've got them capped off at the end, they're not just open-ended. So he's been cracking on with that. He's not using the cutting torch hasten to add, he's just taken that off the pipes to put it to one side. But yeah, Matt's getting on with that. But the main bit Matt's been working on, I'll walk past this for a minute, is the back of the the Aston. And he has been continuing his fabrication endeavours in the back end. So I don't know if last week, I haven't watched the video from last week because I frankly haven't had chance, whether there was any coverage of him making the rear wheel arch tubs. I assume there was. Well, he's now got those tubs finished in terms of welded up and complete both sides. There's quite a bit to cut out the middle of them. It's always best with those tubs to make the centre flat section, the back if you like, solid, and then cut out afterwards, because the solid back holds everything in place while you get your welding done. If you cut the back out first, then weld them, they tend to open up or close up. So it's best to leave that solid, do the welding, and then cut it out afterwards once you've planished your welds up. So at the moment, Matt's got those in the car, screwed in place, got them all aligned, got them all in, they look absolutely spot on, everything's spot on there. And then we've gone through designing the floor that sits over the axle area and working out how we're going to do that. The boot floor effectively, and then the rear bulkhead section. So Matt this morning has just been getting the upper part of the boot floor, the over axle section of the boot floor in place, which you'll notice has a large rectangular recess in the middle, and that's so that we can put a drop section in there for a well in the bottom of the fuel tank. Now, whether we're going to be able to get the fuel tank in and out from that is a whole nother discussion, so we'll have to do a bit of thinking about that, and we may well put the fuel pump and filter in there as well, which is the reason why we've left the bottom of that well open, because we've not quite decided on whether we're going to have that as a fabricated in section or a section that just seals against a rubber gasket in there. So there's various open-ended bits around that, so that's why we're leaving that open for final decisions to be made. But then Matt's was just about to start on, before we switched him on to sorting those brass trims out, making the rear bulkhead section, which is going to come from this existing parcel shelf section down to here, which is the flange on the front of the over axle boot floor section, and then from that flange down over those and down to that bottom corner just by the tape measure there, and that will then form the rear seat back and rear bulkhead section, which will have a folded flange at the bottom, and then we can make the rear seat base section. However, we can't complete that until we've done the centre tunnel section for the prop and done the cutout in the middle of that chassis cross member. That's going to have a tube effectively, we'll roll it, it'll be too big for an actual tube, but we'll roll a section and let it into the top of that box section there, to allow the prop shaft to come through, and then we'll build a humpback bridge, if you like, into the centre of the rear seat support area, which will then be sculpted into the foam for the rear seat when that's made. But yeah, basically cracking on with the sheet metal fabrication now on this, and all guns blazing on that. Matt's doing a cracking job. And getting it all together. Basically, it's the bit where CAD transitions into a bit of sort of making it up as we go, and it's a bit Matt's having the exciting task of sort of trying to decipher what my brain is trying to discharge in terms of ideas of how to do the sheet metal. So it's because he's not worked with me sort of for that long, he's trying to work out how to translate my sometimes poor explanations of how we want to do things. And this is one of the interesting factors of building the cars that we build, and Cal and I have quite a few conversations about this, is that we don't necessarily design everything in CAD. You'll have seen there's a lot of CAD work in this car, but it's not all designed in CAD. There's a very vague line, and it's very difficult to draw, where it's best to stop the CAD and just make it up as you go along. And there's a fine line on that. And you'll find that if you tread too far to either side of that line, your efficiency drops off massively. If you try and make the whole car on the fly, you make a lot of mistakes, and you end up redoing quite a few things multiple times, and it costs you a lot of time, and it costs the customer a lot of money. If you go too far the other way and try and draw every single aspect of the entire car in CAD, what you'll tend to find then is your CAD time costs you a lot of money on areas where a fabricator could just make it. You could just say, well, it's pretty obvious, I just need to put this in here and just put this in here, and a skilled fabricator could just do that work. And the fine line we tread and the little tightrope we walk is that balance between drawing it all in CAD where it's necessary and not drawing it all in CAD where it isn't necessary, and that enables us to be relatively quite efficient. We have quite a few conversations with specialist prototype vehicle building companies, and the efficiencies that are achieved and the costs involved are generally quite far adrift from us. Obviously, the cars we build are not cheap. We don't go into talking about that, but the cars that we build are clearly not cheap. However, compared to a lot of OEM prototype type work, they're incredibly cheap. And that is just due to the fact that we tread this tightrope of old school hot rod building versus modern CAD design. And there's not that many people doing that. It's quite a tricky, blowing my own trumpet here, but it is quite a tricky skill, which we seem to manage to achieve reasonably reliably. And the more people we talk to, the more we find that a lot of other companies do not do things that way. They tend to go one way or the other, tend to do it all by hand or all by CAD, and the in-between route is definitely the efficient route. So anyway, that's the aside for today. That's where we're at on the Aston. Fabrication will be cracking on. As I say, Matt's just finishing off those brass trims for Churchill. The body shop we'll briefly touch on. Did we show presumably we showed the XJC all painted last week. So yeah, so you've seen the XJC in its final paint. Gaz is cracking on now with getting the dynamat in, getting the door fixtures and fittings in place, and basically getting the car into a state where it can go through to the assembly shop, which the plan for that is that this will be going through to assembly shop tomorrow morning, I think. And then we have a job from the Den coming in, actually. We have a side job, if you like, but it's actually quite a big side job because it's a full repaint of a car from the Den coming in, but you'll see what that is next week. But yeah, currently getting dynamat in place and getting fixtures and fittings in place to basically make the car safe to transport around the outside of the building, make sure the doors aren't flying around, make sure the boot lid's not flying around, basically make sure everything's under control, the paintwork's all finished, and that it's in a state for assembly shop to start to pick up. And you know, on that note, there's various processes going on in the background, getting things ready to pick up with this. And then last but not least, because I walked past it and didn't mention it, there's not a lot to report because I haven't actually had a chance to work on it this week because of picking up and putting down lots of other things. However, the plan is obviously, hence it being on the table here, to get on with modifying the Scimitar chassis, doing the tube modifications to these two top tubes at the front and doing the tube modifications to the lower tubes and the reinforcers at the back, which is really my main objective that I've not managed to actually get onto yet. But that's the plan there. So I think that pretty much rounds things up in here for this week. I was going to do some questions, but I had a look through last week's video and I didn't really see any questions that were massively worth me going, you know, nothing that would be that exciting to answer. So send me lots of questions that would be exciting to answer, and I will probably answer them, maybe. Because yeah, I'd like to start doing a little bit of questions and answers each week. I think that might get a bit of interaction going. So anyway, on that note, I think it's time to refer to Cal in the assembly shop and see what has been going on in there.
Thank you very much, Nat. We're going to start with Project Churchill. So we are now sending away the first batch of copper plate parts. So we've just got back, I'm trying to think whether we had these last week. Did we have the rear light housings last week, Jamie? We did, okay. So we're just in the process of taking everything apart now, taking all the door frames out. We've done the final checks of all of the wooden glass templates. So the first batch is primarily exterior. So the front air intake bezels, the side mouldings that run all the way down the bonnet, down the door, down the rear quarter, the rear opening quarter light frames, the main door frames. There's a moulding that runs along the top of the door as well and onto the top of the quarter, just under the rear window. They're going away. The rear lamp bezels, the door handles or the door handle push buttons, the screen surrounds, sort of fillets, trims, whatever you want to call them, that go into the seals. I think it's pretty much everything with the exception of the door mirrors, which haven't been machined yet, and the grille, which hasn't been made yet. But that gives us a really good sort of head start on stuff because we want to get all the doors completely built up because we want to crack on with the interior. And that, on that note, Luke has been frantically 3D printing a million things, but one of the things is the three-dimensional pieces that go together to make the top part of the door cards. And also he's now modelled the wooden strips. I think I mentioned these. We're doing 2 wooden machine strips that will bond to the inside of the roof. They'll be kind of here and here. And that's so that James can staple the quilted leather headlining we're doing for it onto those to be able to allow him to really tension it up hard as a better alternative to having metal bows, as they would call them in there normally. So yeah, good to get all that stuff in progress. I feel like there's one other thing on this, but no, maybe not at the minute. Oh, I suppose the other thing on this is actually what I've been doing, which is planning the wiring harness for it. So we're just in the early stages of going through listing all the components and any pin outs information that we need, so I can do the data sheets for those. well, I'm just about to look at the door latches because we've used X300 door latches on this, and they have an integrated central locking motor in them. They have an incredible amount of connections. I think one being a deadlock function, which we probably won't use, but I need to do all the sort of buzzing out of the terminals on those latches just to make sure I know what's what on those. But yeah, progressing in that direction. And then, very excitingly, if I sneak down here, you will see Project 1. So I think we mentioned that this was coming back. If you've sort of been viewing over the past months, you'll know that we've just finished the sister car, Project Kuma, and when we came to that, we tackled some slight areas of the map and idle control that we weren't happy with, which was really caused by play in the throttle linkage was the best description of it, and backlash in the throttle motor gears, and it was tackled with a couple of areas. Basically, the linkage was changed from being the traditional ball joints with a little socket to being actual rose joints, and then the throttle motor, the Genby throttle motor, we used their limp home module, which is primarily there, so it gives it's a sprung plunger which pushes the throttle partially open, which means that the motor has to pull the idle down to zero, which means if you lose electrical power to the throttle motor, you have some revs, so it's possible to drive the car still. But the added bonus to that is because the throttle motor is having to pull against that plunger to get to idle, it holds the gears to one side of their play. That sort of eliminates the backlash in the gears, so it makes the idle control a lot better. So once we'd done those jobs on Project Kuma, we then did a lot more work on the mapping to get the idle control and sort of light throttle mapping a lot better. And now the customer for this car has driven the other one. He said, yeah, that map is way better. So we're doing the same throttle linkage modifications on this and the same map on this, and while it's here we're just going to give it a going over a spanner check on the lift, make sure everything's good. It's just about to tick over to 1,000 miles, so it's a good time to do that. So yeah, good to see it back. I took it for a quick road test when it first got back, so customer's request basically, so I had a back-to-back between having just driven Project Kuma, the sister car, a back-to-back to driving this one, so I could feel the differences in the cars and also the other differences in the wheels. So we ran kind of a track set of wheels, which were 9-inch rears, 8-inch fronts, on quite track orientated tyres on Kuma, and we did similar briefly on this, but I thought it drove a lot nicer on a slightly narrower, slightly less offset set of wheels with normal road tyres. I think they're Toyo TR1s. I wanted to get feedback from the customer on what they thought, and yes, having him driven it back to back and me driven it back to back, it drives so much better on the normal road tyres with a little bit less offset. Just kind of doesn't weave around with the road so much. I think because the track orientated tyres are quite stiff and they're very, very square shouldered, so when you run a bit of negative camber on the front, which is good on these generally, it does mean, although it's got great turn-in, it's kind of dancing around on the corners of the tyres quite a lot, and on really rough and uneven roads, which most of our roads are, it just feels a little bit twitchy. So we're going to do a second set of wheels, same as the ones on this for Project Kuma. It's a toss-up basically between looks and performance, because they look so much better on the 9-inch rear, 8-inch front combo with the slightly wider tyres, because they really fill the arches, but they drive so much better. So we'll have a for show set and a for the road set. So that's where we're at with that. Allegro now has door mirrors actually, which it's amazing how much difference that makes on a car when you add the mirrors. I don't know why. There's just some sort of psychological thing that mirrors make it seem a more complete thing. So they're on. Luke's been carrying on with printing the interior parts. So for a while, last few weeks, we've seen it had a load of fluorescent bits inside because they were the prototype parts for the remaining lower dash. We've now printed all the final parts for that, so they are literally waiting in reception to go down to James to leather those, and they will be the last bits of the interior, and then everything can go together because he's already done the carpets. So at that point, once those bits are leathered, that's everything ready to go in whenever we want to do that. We've kind of been holding back on the carpets because we're in and out of the car quite a lot at the minute. We also had a couple of bits back from Xylan Coating, so we did a revised fuel pressure regulator bracket for these, which is now ready to be fitted. And then we had a ton of stuff on that same batch for the Interceptor. So we, as you know, have been stripping down the subframes and getting all the surface finishing processes done on those. So last week we had back all the core bits of the rear and front subframes from powder coat. So that would be things like the wishbones at the front, the actual cross member and lower arms at the back. And then items where you want minimal build-up, we've done Xylan coating on those. So things like the drive shafts in the back, the housings that hold the CV gaiters, the bush housings for the front wishbones, bush housings for the lower arms, anything where you don't want to, either there's a bolted face, because often you find with thick coatings like powder coat or heavy paint, that when you bolt them up they go tight, but then the sort of material compresses over time and the bolts go loose again. You end up having to go through a sequence of retightening. So you really want a very, very minimal coating where there are surfaces bolted hard together. Now often in OEM scenarios that's tackled by not having a coating at all when they do rust. But Xylan is such a thin coating, it doesn't really have any give to it. So it's great for those instances where you've got a bolted up face. So a good example of that is the hub carriers for this, which have been Xylan coated, where the brake caliper brackets will bolt up. So there's nothing that could go loose on that over time. So yeah, we've had a load of bits back for that, and then George has been cracking on with the air conditioning plumbing on this, which is a mix of hard lines and flexi lines. So there's flexi lines he's now routed through the front, the hard lines go under the inner wing. Stu had kind of done a mock-up set, so he's doing the final set now. And then we have, I think mostly sitting on the bench over there, removed everything for chrome on this, and chrome and stainless steel polishing, all of which will be dealt with by Derby plating. So all of the moulding that goes around the rear window, which is quite an iconic piece on these, all the gutter moulding, the window frames, everything that goes along the top of the doors. So actually we're going to be taking this batch and all of the parts from Churchill, some of which actually conveniently are laid out on the bench there, over to Derby plating for polishing and chrome in the case of the Interceptor, and polishing and copper plating in the case of the Project Churchill parts. So that's where we're at with that. And then the Camaro is, I'm trying to think where we got to on this. We've just put it on the ramp because we're going to drop it off the ramp, and we are at the point, I think we've done everything we need to do underneath. So George is going through, just doing a final spanner check on everything on the underside on this. We were just getting the parts back for the bonnet pins, which are now looking good. They're on. I've just got to put the outer bezels on the actual bonnet itself, and they'll be ready to go. And then we were waiting for the parts to come back from 3D print for the warning light modules and the instrument cluster retainers, which have literally just come back. So that opens up that job now on this as well. So we can get all that cluster together, get all the interior in. In the meantime, we'll finish spanner checking it, drop it down, and yeah, we'll kind of be on the home straight then really, in terms of getting a bit of tentative road testing done and seeing what progresses from there. So yeah, that's a very exciting prospect. I think at that point, I'm going to hand over to the CAD Den. So let's see what those guys have been up to.
Hi guys, welcome back to another week in the CAD bubble of excitement for going to Poland. Literally this is our last day at work, and then early tomorrow morning, about 4 in the morning tomorrow morning, we start the drive, and honestly I'm really excited. Stay tuned because we're going to try our best to get some pretty good cool footage whilst we're out there.
People don't know what you're about.
Oh right, yeah, a little bit of context. I did say last week's video, but me, Cal, George and a few others from outside of Retropower are about to embark in, I think it's how many miles is it roughly?
It's like 2,000.
It's about 2,000 miles from here to Poland.
No, 1,000 each way.
1,000 each way, I think. I don't know. A certain amount of miles from here to Poland, and George will be taking his Land Cruiser, which is a Land Cruiser, so he'll be completely fine. Cal, on the other hand, is taking his E30, which has been running for all of about 4 days, but I have complete faith that that'll be completely fine as well, because...
You jinxed that, haven't you?
Touch wood, touch wood, touch wood, touch wood, touch wood. Move on to the Retropower stuff. No, so I'm very, very excited for that. So moving back onto work stuff, I think end of last week, on Friday last week, I installed the bonnet pins loosely on the Camaro. We did a little bit of adjustment on the holes. Previously, the parts came back from anodizing that we were waiting on, so they've now been put on the car. I just need somebody from assembly to basically go over, check them, and spanner them up tight, and then they are good to go. And then this week, one of the things I've done, hopping onto the XJC again, is the finishing off the topper for the air filter housing, which is this here. So that sits in the car. Sorry, that sits in the car, that faces forward like that, and then you've got a lid here which comes over the spigot there. We'll clamp the filter in place, and then you can bolt it in through the sides here. Previously what I had was the bolts going in from the top, which was fine at first until I actually saw the filter, and then you could still get the filter in, but you were having to like overlise it quite a lot, and it was a bit of an awkward fit in there. And for serviceability reasons, I've just gone, okay, take the 4 bolts out from the side instead of the top, and then you can really easily get the filter in and out if you ever need to service your car. So that's been sorted, and then the other thing that I did over the last few days is another slight tweak to the alternator bracket for the E-Type. So I did a prototype, and then Nat gave me some very sound advice, which is some things don't need to be artistic, they just need to work. And so I simplified it down a lot, so it's a lot nicer to machine, and then I also beefed it up quite a lot as well from what I had, because again, I think I mentioned in the previous video that these things do need to be quite bulky because the alternator is quite heavy. Separately from that, on Churchill, I have finalised a shape for that front windscreen moulding that I was talking about. So when we have 3D printer time, I can get that profile printed, check that against the car with the other pieces I have, and then hopefully that's all good. Factor in the mounting points for that, and then we're good to go on that. And then also on Churchill, all of the pieces for the front near side upper door card have been printed. So I've started bonding those all together now. And I'm going to carry on with that in literally just 2 seconds, and then I can hand that over to James. Also on the topic of James, all the Allegro bits have now been printed for the lower dash and the yellow car. They were handed over to Gaz a week or so ago. He's done a fantastic job of kind of smoothing out the little imperfections. Now that can also go out to James to get trimmed, and then that's kind of, other than the rear quarter card for that car, that's the interior done for that. And then, yes, the mirror mounts for the Allegro as well. So I think we had a set of black ones from the original car, but then the second car had white ones, and that's not really going with the kind of theme of what we wanted for the car. So I basically just did an exact copy of the originals, but 3D printed in black, and now they're on the car as well for Gibbo. And then other than that, it's kind of just been a lot of really small bits. Starting the process of like prototyping the door locks on the car for Churchill. A little bit of like on-car testing with the that's a really fun one that I nearly forgot. How did I nearly forget that? The Allegro indicator vents are installed and on the car as final parts, which is super exciting. There are a couple of different iterations for that in terms of mounting them in, how we mounted them in, and we landed in a place which I think on this car works completely fine. On the next car I might make a little change just to make the bolts a little bit easier to access, but they work great and they look great, so I'm really happy with that. And then it's honestly, other than that, just been a load of really small jobs like little sheet metal brackets and whatnot. So I think at that point, I'm going to hand over to George. Thank you very much, guys.
Okay, hello. Thank you, Luke. So, as Luke said, it's only Wednesday for me and him, so progress might not be as much as normal. Not that it looks like I ever do any progress, because all my stuff is really big and slow and visually doesn't look like I do anything. But yeah, no, this week I've been carrying on with all of the pedal box tanks arrangement for the E-Type and just the general E-Type in general. So I'll get a little bit of B-roll for a little video for Jimmy to put in the background. But effectively, I've got that to a kind of version 1 complete stage. So it's a lot of the components for it are in the printer at the moment. And just kind of to go over what that is, it's the pedal box, which is also a a breather tank. It's also a washer tank. It's also a brake reservoir tank, and they are all separated. There is also a heat gap, air gap between them. So for the people in the comments that are saying the heat's going to be an issue, then it shouldn't. And also a side benefit of that is slightly heating your brake fluid is actually a benefit because it reduces the chance of moisture. So yeah, anyway, so on the screen now, hopefully if I remember to send it to Jamie, will be a little animation of kind of what it's looking like at the moment. So we've got a cover, which, on this, I'm going to actually rewind it, because I can't remember what I'm actually doing. So what I've tried to do is, we're trying to keep this engine bay really symmetrical and kind of visually pleasing. So the intakes, we've made it so they're fairly symmetrical. And now what I've done is I've made the cover for these tanks to be a very similar shape to the aircon system on the other side, which if you've watched any previous episodes, you will have seen. So yeah, it's going to have a 3D printed cover on top of it, which has the caps that poke through. And it's going to be mounted using fast mounts, which I think we've mentioned before, but they're effectively like a toolless way of removing panels. So they literally just pop in and off, which, to be fair, do I have one here? I don't have one here. But yeah, it'll be a way of, so that cover can just be pulled off really easily because it is only a cover. And then, yeah, so what am I going to say? Yeah, so the cover will be able to be pulled off, and then you can kind of disassemble the entire tank from there. Hopefully it won't need to be disassembled for any reason, but for assembly purposes, it kind of makes everything quite easy and easily serviceable. What you can see on the screen at the moment is the exploded view of kind of all the components. So what we try to do with stuff like this is model everything or download every component to make sure we haven't missed anything clearance-wise, lines-wise, fittings-wise. There's a million different things that can get missed, and sometimes do get missed, but that's kind of part of the process. So that's the case of it where it's all being 3D printed now. I'm aware my brain is a bit of a klutz at the moment, but as I said, we're all in Poland mode. So yeah, but now we've got all these on the printer and also this skin for the bonnet, we can start testing everything together, which is slightly nerve-wracking because it's a lot of my stuff, so hopefully it all works. But yeah, I'll leave it there for this week because my brain is a klutz, and I'll hand back to, I don't know if it's going to be Nat or Cal, one of the two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, and thank you, Luke. One thing I actually forgot to mention was that while Project One was here, very coincidentally but conveniently, we were having a photo shoot done in the workshop for a new magazine, copacetic magazine, which is an unusual word, which I'd never seen and never even heard the word until I saw this magazine. But I'm very excited about it because recent times a lot of magazines have died a death, and I've thought for a while it's about time some really nice printed magazines came back on the market. And this one has basically been started up by a group of petrol heads, a lot of who I know. I know a lot of the contributors to the magazine, and they're keen to be profiling some of the cool businesses around the UK that are working on cars. So I think the first edition's out now. It's available in WH Smith's, or you can subscribe online. I think the first edition company profile was D-Class, who are a very, very good upholsterer, who have kind of set the benchmark for a few years. Obviously, we're trying to beat that benchmark at the moment, so if you are interested in having your interior done, feel free to speak to D-Class, but also feel free to speak to us as well. But a forthcoming episode will have a company profile on us here, and a feature on Project One because it happened in the workshop and the photographer was here, and it kind of made sense to do that. And actually, because the Morris was down the den, we did a little photo shoot of that down the den as well. But we got a few rolling shots of the Escort because I needed to go out in that anyway, so we should have a mix of in the workshop shots. So yeah, Copacetic magazine, hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Go and get yourself a copy, or there's quite a good deal on an annual subscription, so go ahead with that. And on that note, we're going to go down the den and see what Nick's up to down there.
Hello, welcome back to the den. Thank you very much, Cal. So you join me in front of the 500 SEC. So we're starting to do some of the maintenance jobs on this. We've got all the brakes that we're doing. We're also having all 4 calipers off. They're getting refurbished. Customer was complaining that the car had an imbalance on the brakes under semi-heavy braking. So we sent all those off to get refurbished. We are going to be making a new exhaust for this as well. So it's got a mild steel, quite nasty pattern exhaust. You can't really buy anything any good. It's quite a boomy, nasty system. Customer doesn't like it and is complaining that it's horrible on the motorway and sort of an unpleasant noise. So we're going to make a bespoke stainless exhaust for it from the manifolds back. That will free up a bit of power because it's not an awfully powerful engine for a 5 litre. It's only just sort of over 200 horsepower. We want to try and get a little bit more out of it, but this age of car, it's quite complex electronics on it, quite sensitive, don't really want to upset it too much. It will just end up being financially ruinous, frankly, if we try and do too much. So we're going to do the exhaust, and then I think we've already looked at in previous weeks, we're going to do some stuff with the intake as well. So it's got quite a restrictive intake, quite a small air filter, so we're going to open that up a bit. We're going to have a conversation with ITG about what we can do, maybe open up the airbox, put a second intake into the airbox and so on to free it up a little bit. We are also doing some preventative items, so we're going to be changing the fuel pump. We're having a look at the fuel lines, see what state the fuel lines are in. James, who we'll go up to in a minute, is doing some interior stuff. And also we are talking to a local company, Martin Bespoke, who are going to look at the wood veneer. So some of the wood veneer needs a repair, and most of it just needs a polish, but there's a few bits that are damaged, and there's one bit that's delaminating. So Martin's Bespoke are the local people to go to for that. So we're going to get all that sent away quite soon as well. Customer also doesn't like how the car handles because it's basically like a boat. So we're going to look at, so we're currently proposing we go to some Bilstein B8 dampers, which are slightly stiffer but not sort of ruinous, and probably some H&R springs to lower the car slightly, but with the main aim of just stiffening it up slightly. We're also talking to the customer about going to a larger wheel. They're 15s at the moment. We're looking at going to 17 with the intention of reducing the profile of the tyre, just to take a bit of sponge out of the tyre as well, but that's TBC at the moment. So that kind of sums up the Mercedes. Should be lots of more on that for next week. MGF, so James and Owen this week fitted a new fabric hood, which is looking fantastic. So this is one that the customer supplied, so that's all on and good. I'm going to let James talk a little bit more about that because he's the expert on that. Detailing bay, we have probably one of the best cars in the world ever made, the Evo 9 Estate. Chris is working his magic on that for me at the moment. Looks amazing. I took the seats out of it last night because the seats are absolutely hanging, they're disgusting. So we're going to give the seats a deep clean, give the carpets a deep clean, and he's working his magic on all the paintwork. So that's looking rather good, quite excited about that. M3 CSL, good car, not as good as an Evo, good car though. So Luke has fitted the AP big brake kits on this. So we've got 6 pots on the front, 4 pots on the back. We've also done wheel studs on this, and we've got 10mm spacers just to widen the track a little bit as well. So we're just waiting on some alternative rear hoses that are coming from BG. Then we can get all that bled up and get that road tested, and then I will probably have a chat with the customer and see if we can do a little driving video on that in the next couple of weeks, which would be quite cool. So if you fancy that, let us know in the comments, and hopefully I'll talk to the customer every night. He's a lovely, lovely guy, sweet, sweet guy. So I'm sure he won't mind if we do a little driving video in that. Then on the new ramp here, the Cappuccino, which we introduced a couple of weeks ago. So we've just got this on the ramp. We're going to put it onto a trolley. The guys have just quickly pulled the engine out. The engine was only in for transportation anyway, so we're going to a new crate engine, and we are working through, or going to start working through, all the parts that the customer supplied that they've got. The customer knows there's quite a lot of work to be done on those components, so it's a case of us over the next sort of week or two, we're just going to go through all those parts and come up with a definitive job list we can go back to the customer with and chat with him about that. In the meantime, he's ordering a crate engine, gearbox, we've got some gear ratios to look at and a final drive ratio, along with a limited slip diff that he's also supplied as well, so they're going to go in. And we're probably going to look at aftermarket ECU solutions as well, and then we can just turn up the boost a little bit because they're only something like 80 horsepower as standard, so we're going to look at see if we can turn it up a little bit more. It doesn't need an awful lot because it's a tiny car. Obviously, being a Japanese car, it's the K car thing, so it's only a tiny little thing anyway, so it doesn't need a huge amount of power. Really good fun little car. and everything the customer has done on this previously is really good, to be fair. So we don't really need to start getting into taking it apart much more than where it already is. So so we'll crack on with that. I think that is basically it in here. So I'm going to hand up to James upstairs.
Thanks, Nick. Welcome back to the trim shop. Frustrating, busy week this week. Kind of like on a lot of things, being held up a little bit on a lot of things. Not anyone's fault, obviously. Plastic cars, you know how it goes. So yeah, the perf turned up yesterday for the Mercedes. So this morning I've just been cracking on with that. So the rear door cards inserts are done. The front one Jamie will get a shot of. I've started putting that together. Gonna check it out a bit more, then hopefully that one's done. And then closer to the time when the guys downstairs have finished working on it, we'll get the other one out and finish that one. This one's done. This is the back of the front seat. So we've took this off, sanded it all down. This has come out really nice. Shows what a nice colour that is. That will go really nice in the car. Rear headrests, they're done. So Ellie's just finished them. So I'll be fitting them too today to get that done. Can put them out of the way safe. Then it'll be cutting the centres for the seats. So we can crack on then. Everything will be fully cut and we can carry on and get it all machined together. Nick mentioned downstairs that we did the MGF, fitted the roof for that. So I fitted quite a lot of roofs at my last place. Quite a simple roof to do. Once you've got all the rivets around the back sorted, it's just about getting the tension right at the front. So it's quite a stiff roof, so we'll probably leave that shut for a couple of weeks. And there's little adjustments on the latches, so we'll probably, set that to the loosest at the minute. So probably after the weekend or something, we'll notch it down a bit, tighten up, and then yeah, that looks really great. The Allegro dash is here now, as I think Luke from the CAD shop mentioned. So they've already started sanding for me, which is fantastic, saves me a job. But I'm just gonna finish that off, and then we can start trimming that and get that back to them so they can crack on with the Allegro. Started the Mini, the old Mini Cooper downstairs. He just wanted a bit more padding in his front seat, sorry. Then took that apart, found out all his webbing's gone a bit crusty, so we're currently talking to people about getting a new webbing for that. Hopefully crack on with the Mini, get that finished, because that was supposed to be a simple job. And then really exciting, on Monday we should have a Porsche Cayman coming down, which is on air ride. I did the seats at my last place and his headlining's dropped, which I didn't do. That's from standard. So he's ordered a really nice brown Alcantara, so really looking forward to that coming in and hopefully showing you that. So yeah, I'll throw back to Nick downstairs.
Thank you very much, James, and that's all from us this week. So have a lovely week and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.